Essentially what we're listening to is throughout the piece there'll be layers of things coming and going, like quite slow faded kind of textural layers that are coming and going of different hydrophone recordings. So we've got the kind of stridulatory insect sounds of aquatic insects and sort of buzzing and whirring and ticking sounds of plant photosynthesis, which amazingly is audible under the water, so you're able to hear this process. And I think there's, I don't know how many hours worth of pond recordings. It's sort of selecting things for me that were like interesting, but also I wanted to demonstrate the breadth of types of sounds you can hear in this sort of environment. So it was a kind of combination of those two things, like fitting layers together that felt kind of natural. And there's a bit of a sort of sonic narrative to the piece as well. It starts with fairly low levels of activity and kind of builds and changes, and you end up with sounds at the end which kind of essentially is bubbles coming out of the sediment of a pond, and then that kind of evokes the sound of rain, and from that I ended up creating a sort of the final bit of the piece is literally using the sound of rain. And I felt it was quite, despite it being an almost sort of cliche recording, I felt it fitted quite nicely with the pond kind of creation theme. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I found myself more and more kind of working with ecologists and researchers, and I'm really interested in the way things like sound art or these approaches to creative responses to habitats and soundscapes can be kind of different from how an acoustic ecologist might approach that data. I also really like kind of working with these people, because you end up with, I don't know, like this interdisciplinary approach, which brings new things for both parties, I think. Yeah. I'd like to do it more and more, to be honest. And once you get down in these little rabbit holes, you start to find like the way some of these people are really passionate about what they're recording or what their process is in terms of their like rigorous scientific approach, but it's not really thought about in terms of like engagement past a very niche paper they've written or something like that. So it's a totally different way of highlighting these other kind of non-human aspects of our surroundings. And in terms of sound art and music, I feel like this is, for me, I don't know, I'd like to try to have an immediate kind of response, as well as have a bit of a theoretical background about what I'm doing, and it's a balancing act, I think, for me, trying to find like the sweet spot between those two approaches, essentially. So this piece is a 10-minute sound piece in which we're listening to various hydrophone recordings of pond habitats, underwater sounds that have occurred as I've been recording in various Norfolk ponds over actually quite a few years. So it's a kind of culmination of selective composition using these hydrophone recordings. The title of the piece refers to a phenomenon in which, well, it's actually a term people use to describe a mark in a landscape in which would have been an old pond, which has been since filled in, but the ghost pond can be dug out, and once you dig it out, amazingly, there's these seed beds which exist in the mud of the original pond bed, and from that you get this life coming back almost magically out of the seeds which have been dormant under the surface. And I don't know, and I don't think anyone's had experience of making their own pond, but it is just incredible how much life seems to just appear once you put a body of water somewhere. It's such a niche kind of habitat, but it has so much sort of biodiversity and richness in that way. I would say it's probably, like, in some ways a response to other people's research, but also has inadvertently led me to be sort of credited on a science paper to do with this very specific use of hydrophones and recording this kind of habitat. I'm not the first person, by all means, to put a hydrophone in a pond, but I think just inadvertently by the types of people that I was going out in the field with, and then thinking about these processes of recording, and essentially the paper that I got a credit on is to do with gauging a restoration success of these pond habitats. So there is evidence to suggest that by analysing the audio from a pond which is quite stagnant and overgrown, and then a pond which is rejuvenated and full of life, you're able to gauge the success of a new habitat in terms of how much acoustic activity is going on. So that's kind of the background. And so it's kind of weird. It's like I was responding to research and working with researchers, but then it's led to more research through my kind of act of being there and recording, essentially. So I'm kind of working on a bit of a longer term project, an album in collaboration with a researcher, because we're using both mine and his recordings. He's done some very long form like monitoring recordings, which are hours and hours of different water bodies, and not just in Norfolk but around the country. And so using mine and his recordings, his name is Greenhalgh, and so there's been some quite interesting revelations in terms of there seems to be diurnal or daily rhythms in these pond soundscapes. So, for example, some of them tend to have more activity in the insect kind of frequencies and the insect activity at night, and then in the day you've got a lot more photosynthesizing plants, especially on a sunny full sun kind of day. You've got this real burst of activity throughout the day. So the album is kind of taking this like long form compositional like influence from these observed rhythms, and so I guess again it's that sort of thing of merging research with a kind of creative response to the place or the places. So yeah, this album we've kind of just about finished it now, and that's going to be the next thing, is getting that out in the world. What else have I got on? I'm sort of developing some ideas in terms of very tiny sounds. I'm really interested in finding some more ways to speak to people who are specialists in these fields. I'm really interested in, there's laser vibrometer technology, which is quite fascinating, talking about absolutely microscopic vibrations which can be converted back into sound waves. And I've had some brilliant research to do with the sound of spider mating calls and things like that. It's pretty, I just love all these like hidden kind of aspects. I don't know why, it's the hiddenness and the detail which always gets me going.